Perfect. All right, welcome to our webinar. And today we're doing Start Smart, and we're going to talk about strategies for conquering back to school anxiety. And before we get started, a few things that I want to let you guys know is that we are taking questions at the end of this presentation. And if you've been on any of our webinars, you know that we interact quite a bit in the chat box, but in order to make sure we don't miss your question, we are asking that if you have questions directly for Dr. Dotson, that you go ahead and you plug those in the Q&A box, and you'll find that in the menu bar either on the top or bottom. So if you'll go ahead and put those in the Q&A box, we'll be able to get through them a lot quicker than trying to go through chat box. And if you have comments or technical issues, anything like that, do go ahead and plug those in the chat box, however. But questions, Q&A box. All right, before we release everything over to Dr. Dotson, I want to introduce who we are and kind of what we do if you've never been on a webinar. I'm Megan Sanders, and I'm the Training and Evaluation Specialist for Partners Resource Network. And Ms. Christina Henning, who's the Director of Statewide Services, is joining us today as well. Partners Resource Network is the nonprofit agency that operates the statewide network of parent training and information centers. You know us as the PATH Project, the PEN Project, and the TEAM Project. We are federally funded by a grant from Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs, known as OSEP. And we provide education, training, information and referral, technical assistance, and emotional support for parents of children birth to 26 years old, as well as for professionals working with those kiddos. All right, let me introduce Dr. Dotson, and then we'll let him get rolling. So this is Wes Dotson, a PhD in BCBAD. He's the director of the Burkhart Center for Autism Education and Research, and an associate professor in the special education program at Texas Tech University. And he earned his PhD in behavioral psychology in 2010 from the University of Kansas. He has spent over 18 years in special education, working with individuals with autism and other developmental disabilities of all ages. His primary areas of research are social skills, relationship development, and successful life outcomes for adolescents and young adults with autism, as well as the preparation of teachers and other professionals to work successfully with individuals on the spectrum. In his role as director of the Burkhart Center, Dr. Dotson oversees over a dozen clinical services, multiple funded grant projects, and several cross-disciplinary research groups exploring issues related to autism identification and treatment in the community. Burkhart Center team members work with over 100 university and community partners to provide an array of services and opportunities for those who are served by the center. All right, Dr. Dotson, I will let you get started. Thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Megan. Hello, everyone on the webinar. It's an honor to be here. I really enjoy getting to reach out and to meet families and to interact with folks who are in the trenches and doing the hard work. So I very much am excited to be here today. I'm excited that we're going into a new school year. I started my career as a paraprofessional in a middle school autism class, and then I was a high school special ed teacher before I went to grad school, and somehow ended up where I am today. So I have worked in the trenches as a teacher and as an educator, and I've worked in residential settings, and so I very much appreciate kind of what it means to be transitioning between settings and times a year and what's going on. And so I have a couple of goals for today in this webinar. The first is I want to give you some practical and pragmatic tips and ideas to set you up for a positive, a smooth, and a predictable transition into a new school year. I really want to give you some things to think about. You know, in a 45-minute talk, I'm not going to be able to solve all the problems in the world, but my goal is to get you thinking. It's to give you some directions to think and maybe some things to try or some questions to ask that can help get you to where you need to be with your kid or the students that you're working with. So I want to give you some pragmatic tools that you can use. But most importantly, I'm here for you. This is your webinar and your training and your opportunity to get your questions answered. And so I want you to be asking questions. I want you to ask for clarification or another story, or if I'm not talking about something you'd hoped I would talk about, speak up and say it. It looks like we've got a pretty good number of you on here, north of 60, which is awesome. So if one person has a question, there's probably 4 or 5 other people sitting on this webinar that have a question as well. I'm going to do my best to make sure that I leave time at the end for that I have time at the end for questions, and that I can field things, as we see things come in on the Q&A. If there's something in the middle, you're not going to be able to throw me off. I used to teach 9th graders. You really can't rattle me. So I'd rather you be asking questions and showing me what you need as we go, and I'll try to modify what I'm saying as I see the stream come in. I teach in an online graduate program, so I am used to seeing chat windows and things rolling as I talk, so that's not going to bother me. Let me know where you have questions. Let me know you have comments, and let me know how I can help. That is fundamentally what I'm here for. Okay, so let's dig into what we're specifically going to be doing today, and that's talking about the transition into the new school year. I want to start with context. I believe it's important to set the stage for the environment we're going to work in. I find a lot of times in a situation like this, we come into a webinar and we immediately want the solutions, and that's great, but I just want to start with some context. First, we have to remember that the first of the school year, whether it be going into a new year, a new school, a new class, a new crowd, that's hard for all of us. It's not always the disability. Sometimes it's middle school sucks. Sometimes it's 9th grade's hard for everybody. Sometimes it's that going to a new school with people I don't know makes everybody anxious. And I don't say that to minimize the issues and the struggles. I say it as a reminder that we're not going to get to the end of this thing with a perfectly calm child who's really excited every time it's going to be a transition to a new place. A new year and a new school, or even the same school with a different class, is hard. We also have to remember that when it comes to anxiety, we're not after total absence. Making a child fearless is not a desirable outcome. And those of you who have children who aren't afraid of water, or who aren't afraid of traffic, or who will talk to anybody and everybody with no fear of strangers, understand anxiety can be a positive and useful tool. So when we talk about dealing with anxiety, when we talk about helping transition into new environments, the goal is not to do away with all the anxiety around these transitions. It's to learn how to use it. It's to recognize that anxiety is an opportunity. When we feel anxiety in a new setting, that means we've pushed ourselves. That means we've stepped a little bit outside of our comfort zone, and anxiety doesn't have to be fearful in those situations. Anxiety can simply mean, oh, I'm feeling a little aroused because I may not know exactly what to do. I may not have all the answers. But good. We must have some anxiety in order to learn. Because if there's not any anxiety or excitement or arousal, if there's not some kind of juices flowing, why learn? So we need to see anxiety around transitions not as a challenge or an impediment or something to be defeated, but as a signal that this is a wonderful opportunity to grow and learn. That if they're showing us anxiety around a new place, we have an opportunity to teach the skills or routines to learn to be in new places and to be more successful. And then what I always say for all of my pragmatic trainings, there are no silver bullets. This is not always going to work. You're going to have a perfect routine that worked last year and it won't work this year. You're going to have a social story that he loved going into 4th grade that won't work going into 5th grade. You're going to have something that's worked for 27 students before this one, and it won't work for her. You're going to have to struggle. It's going to be occasionally hard. You're going to have to revamp. You're going to have to try it and fail and try it again. It's not going to be pretty. We know transitions are hard, and especially for our students on the spectrum, they're even harder. So it's not going to work every time. It's sure not going to be pretty every time. But if your child is transitioning into a new school year, isn't that a great problem to have? They're in school. If the anxiety is around being cool with their peers or around how they fit in, that's the kind of problem we want to be solving. We want to be solving the problems related to inclusion. We want to be solving the problems related to giving our students and our kids an opportunity to access the same experiences everyone else has. And that's what we've got to keep forefront and center when we talk about this work. It will be hard. It will be messy. Everyone will struggle with it. But it means we're solving a problem because we have a student or a child in school anxious about peers and anxious about access and opportunity. So some other things to think about. When we talk about strategies, one of the things that I as a therapist, and especially I as a teacher, would do that was problematic is that I would find a cue or a support or a visual schedule that worked with one kid, and I would just assume automatically, hey, we'll use the same thing with all the kids and it'll be great. And we can't do that. I'm not going to be able to give you a strategy in this talk that's going to work for all 63 of you on this call. That's not the way it works. We have to be aware that the students we work with tend to be literal, and literal in different ways, meaning we have to be more explicit. We have to be prepared to give guidance or routines in places that some other kids might not need it. And that need tends to be idiosyncratic, meaning every child might have a different need for specificity. I've worked with kids who must know what time things happen. And I've worked with others who must know what order it's going to happen in. And I've worked with others still who need to know who's going to be there, but they're not as worried about what's happening. So we have to remember that as we talk about all these supports and these ideas and these tips, you're always going to have to be prepared to take that and put it in the context of your child or your student. The biggest issue that I see overarching when we talk about difficulty with transitions, and especially transitions into new settings like new school years, is that if our kids aren't aware yet of their feelings, or if they're not good at yet labeling their self-awareness, they may not recognize when they're getting anxious. They may not know why they're getting anxious. So you may be in the car on the way to school for the first day, and they think they're excited to go to school, and you see them shaking, and they don't realize yet that they're anxious or afraid. Or they may know that they don't want to go to school, but they're not able to yet label that it's because I don't know what's going to happen Tuesday and I only know what's going to happen Monday, or because Jenny's going to be there and Jenny always asks me questions I don't know how to answer. They may not be able to articulate what's causing the anxiety as cleanly as other kids might. And so one of your jobs in supporting a student back into school is to be aware for them of where are those points of stress and anxiety. So we're going to talk about building supports around the stressful times and how important it is to be aware of what those stressful times are for a kid, but also we need to be aware the kid's probably not going to look at us and go, well, you know, Mom, math is a really unstructured time because the teacher's not very organized and we have to sit at different chairs every time, and that makes me really nervous. And so once I get really nervous, I can't concentrate on the math. And then when I can't concentrate, I don't raise my hand to answer and I lose participation points. You're probably not going to get a narrative that is that coherent. So understand part of your role is to help that student develop self-awareness, to help them recognize. I like to say things, and here's a free tip that's not even in my slideshow, like, when you were talking to me about math class, you seemed to be most uncomfortable with the seating arrangement. I like to help them see and draw those connections if they're able. So that's something you're going to have to do as we go into these tips. It's not going to be as simple as a list or one social story for them all. You're going to be, so, you might have that social story, but then you're going to look at that kid and say, okay, what do we need here? Okay. But let's keep going into why we do this. I'm going to talk overarching here. What's the goal? Whether it's getting them into a new school at the beginning of the school year, transitioning to college, changing bedrooms, moving. There are two goals we have anytime we talk about helping support students through transitions. The first of those is to help create a stable and predictable environment during the transition so that the child knows what to expect. Fundamentally, when we talk about things like visual schedules and advance notice and talking to the kids for a month before school happens, or taking them to school to meet the teacher first, or the transition plans you do between elementary and middle school, all of those are designed to help the student know what's coming next. So one of those goals is just that sort of thing. What are the things we can do so that the child knows what to expect? And ideally, what can we do so that what's coming and what the child expects is stable? Meaning we don't change the morning routine 7 times in the first 2 weeks of school. Or that, one of my hardest cases of all time in this was transitioning a kid from middle school to a high school that had a rotating block schedule that every 3 weeks the block schedule was different. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday all had different schedules. And then every 3 weeks, which class was on the Monday, Wednesday, Friday block switched to the Tuesday, Thursday block, and the Tuesday, Thursday block switched back. Well, for a 14-year-old with autism, this was the end of the world. So we had to think about a lot of practical supports to say, okay, how do we help this become predictable? How do we help them see the environment and go, oh, when I see this, I know that's going to happen. Or I know when I walk in that door to the left is this. It's about stability and predictability in whatever way we can give it. That's the first goal in setting up a good transition, is to figure out how to make that transition, even though it's different, still be predictable. The second goal has to do with setting this student up to be able to tolerate future transitions. And that is to teach them functional and desirable social and problem-solving skills to use during the transition. Teaching them ways to ask for help or to ask for guidance in a new environment. Teaching them ways to enter a new group or develop conversation skills that allow them to join a new group when they go to a new place. It's about teaching them how to create their own schedule so that instead of you having to provide the predictability and the stability, they can start to do that for themselves in a new environment. So we want to both control what we can control to make this transition environment as known as possible for our clients and our students and our kids. But what we then want to do is teach them how to do that for themselves. So those are our goals. That's what we're after. That's what we want to do. How do we do it? Well, that's the next part. I'm going to take those two goals, and for the next part of this webinar, we're going to break those two goals down into some component steps. And within each of those steps, I'm going to describe some of the ways you can do that. This is getting into kind of the practical tips. This is also the part of the presentation where your feedback will shape the most what I tell the stories about or what I give examples of. So this is where I want you to jump in and be like, oh, tell me that for a 3-year-old or something like that. So know that we're going into now, how do we do those two things? And what are some things to think about? And what are some examples of what it looks like? So when we talk about setting up a stable and predictable environment so that the child knows what to expect, there are 4 things that I consider to be a part of meeting that goal. There's giving advance notice. There's visiting early, so creating advance awareness of what the new environment looks like. There's the creation of routines, and there's tying success during this transition and into this new environment back to the home. So I'm going to talk very specifically about school transitions here as we talk about this, where we're going to talk about we're going into a new school year. And I'm going to assume that at a minimum means that even if you're in the same building, you're in a different classroom, potentially with a different teacher and some new kids around. For some of your students or children, this might be going from elementary to middle school, or going from middle school to high school, or going from PPCD into the gen ed classroom, or maybe going from homeschool to school for the first time. It could even just be, it's been summer and homeschool's been, a little relaxed, and now we're going to go back to working harder every day. The key thing is, each of these steps is a way to try to get ahead of where we know there are likely to be struggles. So let's start with giving advance notice. You guys in the comments before this webinar started were already talking about school and practicing the school routines, and that's really at the heart of this. Advance notice means you're telling that child as soon as possible, hey, in a month, you're going back to school. In 3 weeks, you're going back to school. Or showing them, here's a picture of your teacher that you're going to have next year. So there are a lot of ways that people give advance notice, and you want to tailor these to your specific child. First, just talk about it. There is great power in the information we share in conversation. If we simply talk about the new year as if it's going to be okay, and describing the things that are going to happen, we're doing a significant part of helping reduce anxiety. If we're saying, hey, when you get to school and meet Miss Smith, you're going to be in a classroom on the left of the hallway, or whatever it is, just talk about the new school year in a positive voice about the things that you know are going to happen that you think your kid's going to like. Just talk about it. Don't talk about it with anxiety. Don't be like, now I know you're not ready to go back to school and you're probably nervous about, you're probably nervous about this new teacher, and I know you don't know what to say with your friends. Like, how you talk about the new year will have a big impact on how your kid feels about the new year. So think about your talking not as you talking, but as a form of advance notice. Think about what you say and what that signals to your child about what the next year is going to be like. And talk in positive ways. That's tip number one. Simply talk to your child about the transition in a way that's positive. Even if you're terrified on the inside, talk about the transition and what's going to happen in a way that sets the child up to anticipate it instead of to fear it. Second, describe and practice the schedule. So get with the school, talk to your teacher, figure out what's their day going to look like. As much as possible, be showing them what a school day looks like next year, so that they don't have to get there for the first day to figure out what this is going to be. So if you can get a schedule of, hey, you're going to do math first and then reading and then this, or when recess is going to be, or when they're going to get to take a break or see their friends, to the extent that you're able, describe and practice going through that schedule with your student before they're dropped right into the middle of it. Related to that, some kids do really well with a calendar. This is one of those things that I think is very specific to the kid, but I know a lot of families who have a wall calendar, and they will together mark off the days until school starts. Going back to my first point, though, this shouldn't be a calendar where the first day of school is a skull and crossbones and a burning fiery pit of despair. You need to be keeping a calendar toward the new school year, framing it as if, hey, we get to go back to school. It's not that we're not going to acknowledge that there might be anxiety. We're going to talk about that in the second part of this. But it is really important that your advance notice implies that school's going to be better. In other words, making this transition is going to give you more structure, more predictability. You're back to a routine. You're going to meet new people. You're going to get a chance to earn new reinforcement. Find ways to give that advance notice in a structured way for your kid. If a wall calendar works, great. If a countdown calendar works, great. If they don't like visuals, you can just say every morning, all right, 5 more days to school, 3 more days to school, but give them a way to mark time to prepare themselves that it's coming. Next part of creating that stable and predictable environment, visit early. I like to think a good part of any transition plan for schools is to bring students coming to that school for the next year out to the school early so they can see the building and see the facilities and meet the staff in advance. But even if the school doesn't formally schedule that, that doesn't mean you can't reach out to that school and ask in advance. We try with all of our students with autism to get them into the school building and to meet their teacher before the school year starts. We talk about going into the school when it's empty and quiet, so it's less overwhelming from a sensory and a stimulation standpoint. We talk about going into the school while it's empty so that you can see the classrooms and practice navigation in a way that doesn't stigmatize your child. So when I said right before we started about that flashing yellow sign we sometimes put over our kids' heads inadvertently, sometimes when we do things like walk into school with them the first day and carry around a map and hold their hand and plan their route and routine with them, we're doing that in a very public way that can be embarrassing for the kid. If you go early, you can arrange a time that they're not going to encounter peers where you can still do what you need to do to help your kid know the environment. I like to say when we go visit classrooms, also find the break rooms. So one big aspect of controlling anxiety is knowing that you have a plan. If your kid knows, if I get overwhelmed, I don't know what to do, they'll feel more anxiety if they get overwhelmed. If they know, hey, if I'm overwhelmed, there's a break room in Mrs. Jones's class and I can go sit on a beanbag for 10 minutes anytime I need it. Not only do then they have a place to go if they're anxious, that actually makes it less likely that they'll become overwhelmed and need to take the break. It's a really cool finding from the literature that freely available breaks actually reduce the number of required breaks for kids, not increase them. Because if kids know they can have a break anytime they need it, they're more willing to work through a difficult situation because they know if it gets too hard, they have a break. Anxiety works the same way. So if you go to the school early, it gives you an opportunity to see that environment and in advance be thinking about, okay, how do we navigate between places and where are these safe zones going to be? Is it the teacher's classroom? Is it the counselor's office? Is it the nurse's office? You can practice the navigation and you can meet with the staff to talk about it. 30 minutes spent meeting the counselor who's going to be in the room if your kid needs to take a break, or the nurses who are going to be in the office when they go to sit on a couch, can pay dividends when school starts, because instead of also having to be anxious, how's the nurse going to feel if I come for a break? They've already met the nurse. They've already seen the break. They've already practiced it before anyone else was there. Now I don't have to be anxious about what the break looks like. I just have to figure out what's causing the anxiety in the environment in the first place. So visit early. Next, and you guys talked about this as well, so I'm not going to spend as much time on it. It sounds like we got a pretty cagey bunch. Create routines. A big part of stability and predictability during transition is less about the environment and more about the person being comfortable that they know what they're doing in the transition. If I'm moving to a new house, I may not be able to control everything around the move, when the movers get there, or whether I got to vacuum the carpet when I get there or whatever. But I can make a packing list, and I can organize which things go in which box, and I can plan which room gets emptied first. I can create routines that I use to handle unexpected situations. And so part of creating stability and predictability is to create routines that allow us to navigate a new place. I talk a lot about this when we talk about like vacations. If you take a child with a disability on vacation and they've never stayed in a hotel room before, one way to help them tolerate that is to give them routines that carry over from home. So if they have a bedtime routine or a snack routine or a movie routine, that they know that even if I'm in a room I've never been in before, in a place that I've never been, with people around me that I don't know, I still know what snack time looks like. I still know what a movie looks like. I still know I'm going to brush my teeth and then go to the bathroom and then change clothes and then go to bed. Routines provide stability in environments that may not be predictable yet. So what are some routines for a back to school thing? Well, I'm a big believer in maps. I still carry a road atlas in my car, and I buy a new one every year, and I have for the last probably 30 years. Maps are powerful because they convey a lot of information very quickly. And often one of the biggest anxieties for students in a new school or a new place is they don't know where to go or how to get there. So even having something simple like a map that can be inside their planner or that they can put in a binder can help reduce anxiety about knowing how to get around. A lot of our students really do well with a book of pictures. So pictures of their teachers, pictures of their desk, pictures of the door to the classroom so that if they get lost in the hall, they can see what it looks like. Particularly pictures of the break area, pictures of the safe people. You can do it as a book of pictures. Smartphones and tablets being what they are today, you can make them a photo album on their iPad or a photo album on their phone that they can just pull it up and they can see what they need to see. A lot of our students like social stories. So create social stories to describe how to go to lunch, how to go to gym, how to get off the bus, what it looks like in this new school year, in this new environment. If you have existing social stories that have worked well, make sure you modify them to account for the new environment. Oftentimes that can be part of reducing anxiety, is to find as many routines as possible that have stayed the same. So I might say something to a student like, hey, I know it's a new teacher and you got some new kids in the room, but guess what? If you need a break, you're still going to ask the same way. All you have to do is raise your hand and point to the picture. I might say, hey, I know you've never been in a science class before and you're really scared of all the equipment, but you know what? Worksheets are worksheets. You're still going to put your name in the top left corner. You're always going to turn it in when you're finished. Your teacher's still going to come and check if you need help. And when you're doing things you've never done before, we'll be here with you. So finding these routines are a way to create comfort and the knowledge that they know what to do, even if they don't necessarily know what's happening around them fully. I'm also a big fan of videos. That's the other beauty of modern technology. I have worked with several students who were very, very anxious about navigating full hallways, where we came in before school started and we had them take their phone, and some kids like to hold it and be first person. Other kids like you to be behind them filming, where we literally make a video of them walking in the hallway, turning, going to their locker, getting a book, going to their first class. And then we make another video from that class to the next class so that they have something that they can watch that shows them exactly how to navigate, that even if they get flustered or there's people around, they've got something that visually maps onto what they're doing that can guide them through the literal transitions of the school day, but can also, like a map, help them feel confident that they know how to get there or that they know what to do. And then you can put that under different video titles. So you might have like, I'm overwhelmed, and you can hit that video and it'll say, if you're feeling overwhelmed, the first step, look around, find a safe adult, and they might have pictures there. Okay, go to that person, tell them you need help, or whatever your routine is. Again, I can't get too general here or too specific here because I don't know all your specific settings, but think about the power of giving your student tools that can be subtle, like a video on a phone or a map on the inside of a planner, to help them see the routines and the rules for this new environment. Okay. Finally, in terms of stability and predictability, take advantage of your routines and your reinforcers and the good things you're doing at home so that you tie back their success at navigating this new school year to things that they already know and trust. So if they already know that at home, if I do my chores, I get video games, there's stability and predictability and trust in that. If they already have an arrangement where they know, okay, at home, if mom's happy, I get dessert. Or if dad likes that I did this, I get an allowance. Well, you can take advantage of that trust and that predictability to reward your student for succeeding during this transition period. Give them something to work for that they can trust, even if the school day terrifies them, even if they don't know what's happening from one minute to the next, even if they're completely overwhelmed. I do know, okay, as long as I stay in class every day, you know, if I stay in class, when I get home, mom's going to let me play video games for an hour or whatever. You want to look at what is success. If it's that you just want them to go to school, stay there all day and come home, tie that back to something good at home. If the goal is, I want them to go to school and find someone to, you know, eat lunch with, tie something at home to that outcome. Make sure they know you value it, and make sure they know you're going to reward struggle, that you're rewarding the process. We're going to talk here in a little bit about the coping strategy, that success doesn't have to be going into school on the first day, being successful in every class, doing all their work and making friends. That may be the success for the year. At the beginning, during this transition, you may say, hey, you rode the bus, got off the bus, and walked into the building all on your own. Awesome, dude. That's success for the first week. You got there. So make sure you're telling them what you expect, and you're tying success, and whatever that looks like for your kid, back into things they already know and trust. That you're going to follow through and deliver these things, that home is a place where I know what's going to happen. You can play on that to give them confidence. The other thing is, if this is a big transition to a different school, to a different teacher, understand that this will be hard, and make sure that part of what you're doing is giving them space. After school, understand that may be the time they need a few hours on a video game, or they may just need to take a nap. They might just need to decompress. I think sometimes, and as someone who runs a behavior clinic, and a lot of our families come straight from school and spend 2 or 3 more hours with us doing intensive therapy, we know the first of the school year, especially for our clients who have just transitioned into a new environment, we've got to understand they've just worked really hard for 7 hours in a scary place, and that may not be the time for us to do 3 hours of really intensive behavioral work. So understand that that transition into school is a time you may have to pull some pressure off or create some space to give them the ability to recover. Let them focus on the transition, maybe for a week or so, before you ramp things back up. We have a tendency, I think, as professionals to always want to keep them busy. Go, 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 go. But if they're anxious, if going to school for them is something that causes them fear or gets them worked up, that's physically demanding. You know, being afraid for an hour is as hard on your body as jogging for an hour. It takes a toll. So give them that space at the end, and give them a predictable, stable way to know, like, okay, you've worked hard at school, you're going to get the 30 minutes at the end of the day. I'm not going to bother you. You can go to your room, whatever. Again, you make that specific for your kid. Okay. I haven't seen any questions in yet, so that's good. So I'm going to keep on trucking. The last piece is to teach these functional and desirable skills so that they're prepared for the unexpected, that we can't have a routine for all the way. There are 3 things that I talk about, and they're going to tie back into things we've already said. And then we're going to open this up, because now we're into kind of the applied part of this. But there are 3 things around teaching desirable skills that I think are important. And some of them we don't always think about. We want to go straight to solutions, but I want to start by encouraging you simply to ask questions of your kid, of the staff that work with them. And we're going to talk about how we practice for the stress that we know is already there. And then we're going to talk about tolerance. So this success as that variable definition of success, and that the idea sometimes is that success is merely staying in the environment that's really terrifying to you. Okay, excellent. See a couple of questions. That's great. Let's start then with this idea of asking for questions. For us to be able to teach skills, especially related to problem solving or coping or interacting with others in a way to reduce anxiety, the first thing we have to know is, for that child, what is making them anxious? What about going back to school is making them feel upset or nervous? If we don't know where the anxiety is coming from or why the anxiety is happening, then we can't possibly teach the child how best to cope with it. A child might report that what makes them anxious is they just can't handle being around a lot of people. So their anxiety may not be around the schoolwork at all. They may be perfectly comfortable interacting with peers, but it's the sensory environment. The hallway is too loud. The texture is too much, and they're getting bumped and hit and brushed against, and people hit the back of their chair. The anxiety may be purely physiological, meaning it's all sensory. Equally, the anxiety could be entirely about social. I like to joke that's all of ninth grade. All of us in ninth grade went, oh God, what do they think of me? They're going to hate me. I'm not popular. I'm not cool. So is the anxiety social? Is the anxiety around what peers are going to think, or if I'm going to be cool? Well, that's a different coping strategy than if it's sensory. In addition to knowing what makes them anxious, you have to know what they're excited about. Because the ultimate tool in dealing with anxiety is to give somebody a reason to go through it. All of us were terrified the first time we went on a date, or the first time we were going to kiss somebody, or the first time we went on a job interview. Like, terror and anxiety are universal. The reason you go through it is because you value what's on the other side. So we also have to understand, for our students and our children, why? What are they looking forward to? We run a program here for degree-seeking college students. We're going to have 48 college students on the spectrum here at Tech, earning degrees. They are fully admitted. They live in the dorms. And when we ask them, what are you most excited about? They'll say, I'm going to be in college, and I'm going to make friends, and I'm going to make the friends I'm going to have the rest of my life, and I'm going to get a career. And we say, what terrifies you? And they say, I don't know how to make friends for the rest of my life, and I don't know what I want to do for a career. So sometimes what makes them anxious is what they're looking forward to. But other times it's different. That person with sensory issues may say, man, I am so excited to be in high school and I get to go to dances and go to football games, but I'm terrified because I don't know how to handle the noise. So ask questions, because the more you know about why they're anxious and why they're excited, the more you're going to know about how to structure the supports they need to get through it. Then what I often say is, once you know what makes them excited and what they're working for, you have to practice for that stress. You have to teach them and give them experience with going through that stress. So when we talk about what routines do we need, what visual schedules do we need, what sort of advance notice do we need to give? Well, first and foremost, you create those where the stress is. If I know I have a student who's terrified of loud environments, I don't need to practice how to handle being overwhelmed during reading in class. I need to practice how to handle being overwhelmed in the hallway between classes. I need to give them a routine that they can use where the stress happens for them. The other thing I need to do is make sure that we are teaching them how to ask for help, specifically when they're just going to have to endure something because they don't have the skill yet. I talked at the very beginning that a lot of our students struggle to recognize when they're anxious or to know what's making them anxious. And so another type of practice we need to do for stress is to give them coping strategies when they get surprised, when they weren't expecting to be anxious or didn't realize this was going to upset them the way that it did. Can we teach them how to take deep breaths? For some of our students, it's how to recognize they need to ask for a break. And if we're talking about students middle school and above, the universal break request, you all know it, even if you don't, go to the bathroom. Professional adults use it all the time. If I'm in a stressful meeting and I don't want to talk to somebody and I need a few minutes, I get up out of that meeting and I go to the bathroom. Because I can go sit in a stall and no one's going to come in behind me and check to make sure I'm really going to the bathroom. So work on giving them coping strategies for when we don't have a routine yet or when something surprises them. Because again, if they know they have a coping strategy, they're more able to tolerate an unexpected or new environment overall. So make sure they know how to cope once they're not okay. And then in a school environment, who do they ask for help? If they need help or permission to get to a break area, if they need to ask to go to the nurse or the counselor, or if a teacher needs to know that, hey, when I go over into the corner and I put my hands over my ears, that means you need to help me by prompting me over here. Who are those people they need to ask for help? And in that environment, what's it look like? And that's kind of the third thing rolled into the second. But sometimes we forget, have we talked to our teachers about this? Have we talked to the principal or the counselor or the nurse? I worked in a school one time. We had this beautiful break routine for a young man. He was transitioning from middle school to high school. We had a great transition plan. We took him there like 6 times. We took him, their staff came to us. We did a beautiful job. We get to the first week in high school and he melts down, and we knew he would. We had identified the break room as a rest area in a resource classroom, but what we didn't realize is who was in which classroom had changed over the summer. And so his special ed teacher that we'd done all this with didn't have the classroom with the break room anymore. And that first week, he melted down and he went to his break room and walked into a classroom full of people that didn't know who he was. So you got to make sure you're bringing people in. Okay, I think I have nailed it exactly with 15 minutes or so left for questions based on when we started. So I could not have landed that any better. I normally have some wiggle room where I don't plan my pacing as well. So yay for me. I see a few questions that have come in here. So Megan, if you want to facilitate, throw me stuff to talk about.
All right, I had to unmute myself. Sorry about that. Okay, so we have had questions and comments come both into the chat box as well as into the Q&A. Let's go ahead and we'll pull from the Q&A.
Okay.
And then we'll keep checking the chat box. But if you had a question that's in the chat box, if you'll move it over to the Q&A, that would help me tremendously. Okay, so Norma's asking what your thoughts are about anxiety from sensory processing disorder, meaning like phone ringing, tactile aversions, triggering physical meltdowns accompanied by SIBs and injury to others. Any general info you have here for that?
Great. So the first thing I'd say, Norma, is this is not something you do on your own. One of the biggest mistakes we make in sensory processing disorder is to think that if the kid just wanted to, they could tolerate it. Or, hey, just handle that for 5 minutes and we'll get through this. That's not the way physiological anxiety works. If they're aroused, they're aroused. So that's where you want to get with a professional, a neurologist or a behavior analyst or somebody who's familiar with working with sensory issues, because you're not just going to be able to expose them or force them through that. There are very effective protocols that have been designed to gradually help somebody learn to tolerate overwhelming environments, or to gradually expose them to things in a way that they learn to stay calm or manage themselves. And that's the most effective thing to do for that kind of sensory anxiety. You cannot just force somebody through that. So I fight a lot with schools who just say, well, he'll get used to it. We'll just put him in the room for a week and he'll come down. He'll figure out it's okay. That's not likely to work. That's something that needs a careful program, but they do exist.
Okay, so next we have my child's going into 8th grade. He seems to be okay with already known transitions and even last minute changes, but he gets really edgy and anxious for things like not being able to open his locker or responding correctly to teachers in front of peers. He starts hitting his head against walls, starts crying or hitting himself on the head, raising his voice. We see this behavior when peers are present. He is not afraid to fail or not know what to do outside of the school environment. What can we do besides explaining to teachers what works and what doesn't work for him?
All right, I've got it.
Endpoint. So.
Okay. So I hope I get your name right, Margiana.
Yeah.
Margiana. Okay. What it sounds like is that the anxiety is around being judged by peers. If he's not afraid to fail when peers aren't around, but he gets really anxious when he does. Sometimes we see something with kids that's the, if I know you're judging me, I'm going to give you a reason. That's an informal way of saying, like, they would rather act out and be judged by that than to be known to not know how to do something. So we see this a lot with high school students who don't know how to read, for example. They'll start acting out in class so that they'd rather be made fun of or judged for acting out than for not knowing what to do and being seen as dumb. So I can't promise that's what's going on with your child, but it's a very common pattern we see there. If it's about everyone else knew how to open their locker and he didn't, well, what's worse? Being stupid and not knowing how to open your locker, or being a weird kid who does weird behaviors? Well, he may choose the behaviors because that's a better, worse judgment, if that makes sense. I would be asking him questions around, why is he nervous? Is it that he doesn't want to be seen as dumb? Is it that when he doesn't know what to do in front of an audience, he locks up? And then it's a stress response. It could be either one. And looking at it to say, okay, when I said ask questions to find where the anxiety is, can he articulate for you what about that thing made him upset? Was that he hit overwhelm and started acting out because he wasn't thinking? Or was it that I was so anxious I had to do something to make them not notice I couldn't open my lock? Because that's two different things.
Okay, and as a follow-up, does the Burkhart Center offer services, social skills type, for children that live outside of your area? And does the center help in developing a behavior plan to be considered by public schools?
We have regular social skills classes that occur throughout the semester here on site. We do camps during the summer, and we have people travel from all over the state for the camps. We don't have any like online or distant social skills classes yet, but we certainly do consultations with families and schools. Families in our focused ABA program, which is funded by the Children's Autism Program at HHSC. That program actually supports us to go into the schools and train teachers on the programs we develop. And we also work with individual school districts all over the state. We have a grant called the Autism Training Workshop Series, where we're going out to all 20 education service centers over the next year and a half and teaching them about the functional behavior assessment and behavior intervention plan process. And from that, we plan to train a little over 300 teachers over the next year and a half all over the state in behavior intervention protocols.
Okay, so there you go. Hey, Teresa's asking, as a parent, she has been doing and advocating everything that you're saying since pre-K, and now her son's in 12th grade. She says every single year she's had to explain everything you're saying. She's just asking, what can we do to help teachers learn this?
A lot of it is continuing to have the conversation. Unfortunately, it really is a game of repetition. I will say from the Burkhart Center standpoint, the Autism Training Workshop series we talked about, we have a whole unit in that 3-day workshop on transitions and these sorts of recommendations. I think it's really about, with the teachers, the same thing that I said at the beginning about how we talk about it and how we frame it. If you approach a teacher in a demanding or threatening manner, or you have to do this because I know it works for my kid, that's not going to work very well. If you come to the teacher with, man, we are so excited to be coming into your class, and Johnny really wants to be there, and if you can do this for him, that will really make him be able to show you how excited he is to be here. If you can talk about the transition and the things you're hoping those teachers will do from a positive standpoint about how it works for them better if we're doing it, that's going to go down easier. And again, it's framing. If they believe you're there to cooperate with them to get to the positive outcomes instead of to avoid the bad ones, that makes a big difference sometimes in their willingness. And then beyond that, it's just, if you get a good teacher, they're going to want to know how to work with your kid, and you reward those good teachers the best you can.
Absolutely. Leslie's saying, if your child is struggling with anxiety from others at school being ill, how can you help them cope?
Okay. So this comes down to more questions, Leslie. Is this about his fear of getting sick if others at school are sick? Is this about he's worried they're going to die? There are a lot of different things. I'm going to respond entirely on the assumption that he's afraid of getting sick because other people are sick. And this is an example where giving a student a routine can sometimes help what is uncontrollable. You're not going to be able to make other people stay at home if they're sick. But you can potentially teach your child, hey, if you know someone else is sick, you can wash your hands between every class. You can carry around tissues and hand sanitizer. You can wipe down your desk after the last class leaves. You can teach them little routines so that if they're afraid of germs, give them a routine to reduce the germs in their immediate environment. They're not going to be able to control the other kids. Give them some way to control themselves.
Good answer. All right. Amber's asking, my son's going into 5th grade. He did not qualify for services at school in 3rd grade and didn't receive an official diagnosis of autism and learning disability until 4th grade. His anxiety has increased since last year. He cries every day and he does not want to go to school. He suppresses anxiety until he gets home, so the teachers don't notice it. What can I do to explain impacts of his anxieties to teachers, even though they are not required to offer services and support since there's no IEP or 504?
That's a tough one, Amber. I'm sorry you're going through that. The first thing I would say is, if you don't agree that he doesn't qualify for services, it is still your right and ability to request a reevaluation. They are supposed to, especially with an autism diagnosis, account for a full life evaluation, not just the classroom. There should be some accounting of that in the assessment. But in the meantime, I would say that if he's still getting all the way through school every day and bottling it up and blowing up when he gets at home, you've got a good starting point, because there's clearly something motivating enough there at school that he keeps wanting to go back. So when we get to those questions, I would say, I'm going to go back to my slide there on asking questions. Where is it? And are there things that you can pinpoint with him to give him some tools that, even if the teachers or the staff aren't going to be a part of it, can we teach him some routines? Maybe he's, and I'm going to spin off the one of being sick earlier, he's terrified of going to the bathroom at school because he doesn't know how, and he's used to being able to go by himself. And maybe that whole anxiety is 80% of what works him up during the day. If you can figure that out, maybe you can go practice going to more public bathrooms at the mall or at a restaurant and do some things to try to pinpoint and address the anxiety where you can control it while you're waiting for the school process to work itself out.
All right. Here is a homeschooling question. Tips needed for a child with autism, cerebral palsy, and neurological medical conditions. Anxiety affected by sensory processing disorder. They're thinking about starting risperidone.
So in complex cases like this, where you have a lot of medical and behavioral things going on. What I always say is if you're thinking about any kind of medication change, please work closely with the physician that would be prescribing it. And if possible, work with a behavior therapist or somebody who's experienced in the sort of data collection you'd want around starting medication in a situation like this. At a minimum, what we recommend is keep some sort of diary or log about your child's behavior for a couple of weeks to get a sense of what's it look like now before you make any medication change. Because especially with a medication like risperidone, it can have very different effects with different kids. You want to be very specific and knowledgeable about what's happening. Dosage effects, particularly with that medication, a very, very small change can have a very large impact, both positive or negative. So it's going to be really important that if you're working through something like this, you're doing it closely collaborating with that physician, and that you're tracking your kid's response to that medication as carefully as possible.
All right. Do you have any suggestions on how you can support anxiety or meltdowns without teaching learned behaviors?
I don't really know how to handle anxiety without teaching. I think for someone to learn how to handle it, they've got to learn to be aware themselves of how they're feeling and where they're feeling. If they're just resistant to, I don't want social skills, or this isn't about that, I think that it's about finding a resource compelling to the kid. If you're talking about how does everyone around a kid manage, like if this child's not going to learn self-management and we need a plan for what to do when they're overwhelmed around it, there's no way I can be specific in an online forum, but I'll tell you the basics. The basics are figure out the dimensions of the environment that cause the anxiety. When the overwhelm happens, simplify and minimize those things in the environment in the immediate time. So if you need to turn lights off, reduce noises, minimize the number of people around, create a very, very clearly marked and practiced safe space that they can go to while they're upset, that is something that will minimize their likelihood of being able to cause harm. And then make sure everybody around that person in the environment is on the same page about how you prompt them to get there. What that looks like in execution can be different. Oh, hold on. I see you clarified here.
Yes.
Okay. So like, how do you get them to tolerate anxiety without just running, leaving class, tearing up the work, all that? You have to give them a replacement behavior. You have to give them another way to feel less anxiety that reduces their anxiety. A lot of times when a situation like this happens, we think, well, if you're acting out in order to not have to interact with peers, and we want you to replace that with interacting with your peers. But the thing is, if you just make them interact with their peers, all you're doing is causing the anxiety. If you want them to stop acting out to avoid their peers, you've got to give them a way to not be anxious when interacting with their peers. That may be by teaching them a routine. That may be by changing which peers it is. That may be around manipulating or gradually exposing them to, say, more peers. So if they're terrified of hallways with 20 people in them, transition them with one person walking beside them and have one person walk past them. And then have two people walk past them, and then have two people walk past them on either side. So you can do some things to gradually reduce the anxiety that you're trying to avoid. It doesn't have to be removing the environment, but if you don't remove the anxiety, you're not going to get rid of the avoidance behavior.
All right. Well, those are some really great questions. I know we still have a few over in the chat box. And Wes, if you would like to stay on after we wrap the recording and answer these, that would be great. If you got to run, we definitely understand that as well. But we're going to go ahead and wrap up just for people who need to get back to work and pick up kiddos and all that kind of thing. So before you guys jump off, let's go ahead and talk about some more upcoming events we have going on. So we talked about anxiety today. We're going to follow up this webinar with another one on August 27th with Dr. Charles Hallmark. He's going to talk about different anxiety disorders in children. So make plans to join us for that. Again, that's 2 Tuesdays from now, again at 12:15. And then we have our upcoming Facebook Live series, and that's going to be gearing up for the new school year. It kicks off August 22nd. I'm really excited for these next 4 weeks to be able to talk about all things pertaining to a new school year. So August 22nd at 12:15, you can join me for IEP implementation. And then following my Facebook Lives at 1:15 Central Time, we're going to have Miss Margiana come on with the Spanish version of those Facebook Lives. So do set your calendars for the next 4 Thursdays and make sure you join us starting August 22nd. Okay, here is our information. So if you have questions, comments, anything you would like to specifically see in a statewide webinar, please feel free to reach out to myself or Christina. Our email addresses are there on the screen. And then if you're looking for a recording of today's webinar or a webinar we've done in the past, please hop on our website and go to that statewide webinars portion, and you'll be able to see all of the handouts as well as the recordings for all of our statewide webinars. And then join us on Facebook, look us up, PRN Texas. This is where we share a ton of great resources as well as upcoming events, and it's where you can join us on our Facebook Live series. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. We know that the back to school season is really busy, so we definitely appreciate you taking an hour out of your day to come on here and get some great information. Thank you, Dr. Dotson. We really do appreciate all of the great information you gave today. For anyone who needs to hop off, go right on ahead, and then we'll get to some more questions. Thanks, guys.